Hello, welcome to my Smushi Come Home any % guide. Smushi is a fun and digestible speed game for anyone at any skill level. In this video, we'll go through the entire any % route, while showing both beginner and more advanced strategies. Everything will also be timestamped in the description if you'd like to skip to specific parts. Alright, let's set ourselves up with everything we'll need for speedruns. Smushi has a built-in speedrunner mode. This will add a timer to the top right corner of the screen, skip cutscenes, and mash through dialogue for you. Speedrunner mode is unlocked once you beat the base game for the first time. There's a few options here, but for our purposes today, we'll be selecting Enabled Any %. This will stop the timer upon game completion. I also recommend toggling Hold to Glide. This will help out later in the run. This run has a couple FPS time saves, so to submit your run to speedrun.com, you must have FPS enabled, and your FPS must remain at 60 or above. We also have an auto splitter. Everything will be linked in the description, and you can find everything you need there. Now that we have everything set up, let's move on to the main Smushi mechanics. Smushi has a lot of classic 3D platformer movement options, like jump, sprint, a glider, but also has a unique mechanic, like the hook. Let's start with the most important option, Smushi's jump. Depending on how long you hold your jump, Smushi will jump shorter or higher. When Smushi lands from a jump, they will slide forward a bit. This is the most crucial part of Smushi's movement. We'll be maximizing jumps to get as many possible as we can, just so we can continuously get those little extra slides. However, you don't want to jump as quickly as possible. You want to wait for a bit for the slide to finish, or come close to finishing, so you can maximize the full length of that slide. If you jump too early, you'll just be cutting off your slide early. When Smushi walks off a ledge, you have quite a lot of time to still get a jump out. These are generally called coyote frames. They're a brief window where you can still perform a jump after running off a ledge. We can use this to maximize the distance on some of our jumps. We will cover Smushi's other options later, but for now, let's get started with the beginning of the run. To start a new run, all you'll need to do is select a new save slot. Upon spawning in, you get movement as soon as the timer starts moving. From here on out, at the beginning of every new segment, I will be showing an unedited example of how it'll look. I'll then break down the notable sections afterwards. Immediately upon spawning, we're already going to start spacing out our jumps to get those small slides we talked about earlier. Climb up the stone lantern and talk to the mushroom. They'll give you the flute. Holding down the sprint button will let you play the flute. All you have to do is traverse across these rocks, attract the ladybug with the flute playing, and then go back to the mushroom on top of the stone lantern. Make sure to hold the sprint button down the whole time to keep the ladybug next to you. Before moving on to the next area, let's talk a little bit about how the water works in this game. The water kind of works like a trampoline. Jumping after the dip will give you a lot of height, but jumping shallow will give you very little height. We can use this to get on top of some of these rocks on the way to the ladybug and back from the ladybug. After interacting with the mushroom, we will now be brought to the snowy forest. After climbing up this rock structure, you want to jump right at the edge of this river. You'll want to stay out of the water as much as possible, since being in the water is much slower. Talking to this guy will give you the tools of the explorer. Now's a good time to talk about a couple new moves in Smushy's moveset. The Leaf Glider is one of Smushy's most important movement options. The Leaf Glider can be pulled out by pressing and holding jump, and then putting it away by letting go of jump. This is where the hold to glide option toggle comes into play. You'll notice the Leaf Glider has a stamina meter. The lower the stamina gets, the more brown the leaf will get. When the leaf starts getting brown, you start to lose forward motion. However, you can still hold the glider out and float for a little longer, even though the stamina is completely out. The leaf won't disappear until you hit the ground. We use a strategy called leaf pumping. You might have heard of it if you're familiar with the Wind Waker speedruns. It works very similar to that. We can use leaf pumps to maximize height and distance by dispersing out our stamina use a bit. There's also a difficult use of the leaf pump to gain more height on the final leaf pump. If you time a series of leaf pumps in such a way that the last leaf pump happens to be when the stamina bar is already run out, you'll gain just a little bit of height. This will be used for an advanced strategy later on. The second item we receive are the hooks. They let you hook onto most vertical surfaces. Once hooked, you can jump to spring upwards. Pretty self-explanatory, and they work just how you'd think they would. Using our new tools, we'll navigate these pillars, skipping the middle one, and head over to the left side of this broken green pail. Here you'll want to jump and attach to the edge of the pail with the hooks, and then jump onto the flatter part of the edge, and then jump up to where the Allen wrenches are. This can be a bit tricky, so feel free to take it slow. Once up there, you'll notice a collectible Allen wrench. We can do a trick here to grab the item and jump at the same time. This trick lets us move while watching the pickup animation. To do this, all you need to do is press the interact button and jump at the same time. Once in the air, start gliding towards the green crystal. You will have to press the interact button again to close the pop-up. I like to just keep pressing both buttons while gliding to easily close the pop-up without needing to time it in between my leaf pumps. The item we just picked up is the Tool of Mining. This lets us break crystal rocks that will be used as currency. In total, throughout the run, we'll need 20 green crystals to afford everything we need. To break the crystal rock, all you need to do is hold down the interact button during all 3 hits. And now we can head over to the next area, the Garden of Spring. If you accidentally missed one of the crystal rocks, don't worry, there's an easy backup later. Head over and pick up the yellow flower and place it in the middle of the yellow circle. We're going to use the same trick that we used for the Tool of Mining. By pressing jump and interact at the same time, we'll place the flower but still have free movement. We'll then glide to where the Spore of Energy will spawn, and we'll grab it as soon as it spawns. Landing in the right spot is a little tricky and will take a little bit of practice. We now have 1 energy spore. Once we get 2 energy spores, we'll be able to sprint, so that'll be the next objective. Once on the mushroom, jump toward the wall and hook it, and jump to release and hold glide to get over the ledge. I like to go in between these 2 shadows for a visual cue. Hook onto the cinder block and grab the blue flower, and do the same trick that we did for the yellow flower. This is our second energy spore, so now we can sprint. Sprinting in this game is a little interesting. You can sprint on the ground like normal, but you can also get sprint speed in the air. That means we can continue doing the small hops we've been doing and still get the sprint benefit out of it. Sprint also has a stamina meter similar to the leaf glider. When the meter runs out, it will fill up halfway before you can start sprinting again. We're going to be holding down sprint for basically the entire run from here on out. Now that we have sprint, we'll jump over here and grab these 2 crystals and then bounce off this flower. If you missed a crystal early on, this one right here is a good backup. Glide over to the bird bath and talk to the guy in the middle. He will give us a wind essence. A wind essence increases our leaf glider's stamina. This wind essence is optional, but I do recommend grabbing it since it'll make some tricks later on a bit easier. Platform off of these strawberries and carefully land on the stick attached to the wall. Then land right before this load zone. We've now arrived at the first big out of bounds skip. We can use the level loads to do some pretty funny out of bounds shenanigans. Let's start with the basics of how these work. Anytime a load is touched, Smushi will start the walking animation into the load if they're on the ground. Keyword if they're on the ground, meaning if we can trigger a load while not on the ground and then influence Smushi's position, we can start the walking animation wherever we're able to reach. If you can place Smushi next to a wall, land on the ground next to it, and then trigger the walking animation, Smushi can actually walk through these walls during this state. Once Smushi is through the wall, save and quit. We want to save and quit because if we let the animation finish, Smushi will load into the area the load was going to take them. Saving and quitting lets us stop that process, but save our new position outside of the wall. When you save and quit, the game will always put you in the last spot you were. So since we're now past the wall, the game will put us past the wall when we load back in. Now that we understand the basics of how out of bounds using loads work, let's take a look at this specific one. To utilize this load, you'll have to jump into the load and then pull out the glider. If you try gliding into it, the glider will stop and you'll land on the ground. Once you have the glider open, turn around and glide off the ledge, then turn back around and hook the wall. This will make you fall down while still being right next to the wall we're going to be walking through. Right after hooking the wall, open the pause menu and get ready to hit save and quit. Once the game starts fading to black, hit save and quit. This gives us enough time to have Smushi walk through the wall. Now reload the save, and once you reload, you will be out of bounds free falling. Once the timer starts, you'll have free movement again, so you're going to want to glide to the left and land on this log out of bounds. From here, you'll look for the ground texture, and make sure you're left of that. Jump off the log and glide under the pink guy and land into the water. Water tends to stretch pretty far under the map, so don't panic if you feel like you're super low. Once in the water, follow the edge of this log and start holding glider once you're under the log. Glide over to the black void underneath the lizard, and boom, now you're loading into Forest of Fall. Something to look out for is if you're a little low, you can actually hook onto the loading zone. Not to worry though, all you need to do is jump and you'll bump into the loading zone and load in just fine. If you're too low to do either, then try and turn around and land back into the water and try again. If you happen to fall all the way down, you'll get respawned at the start of Garden. If you've made it here, good stuff, because that's probably the hardest part of the run to execute and understand. Head over to the river and grab the 3 crystals in the middle. From here, jump off the rock and hook onto the green vase and jump up to the top. Jump up to the platforms and grab the acorn. From here, jump onto the spoke of this wheel, then grab these 3 crystals. Now we have all the crystals we'll need for the rest of the run. Bring the acorn to the area between this gray can and the wheel spoke. And now it's time to talk about item skewing. Any holdable item is an item that's able to be skewed. Skewing an item just means to change its shape. And the way we achieve that is by jumping and during Smushy's squash animation, re-grabbing the item. This will slightly alter the shape of the grabbed item. The timing of when you pick up the item during the squash animation is crucial. We don't know the full science behind why the squash timing matters, but it seems that the lowest point in your squash will give you a long acorn, and then grabbing the item quickly gives you a flat acorn. And the type of acorn we're looking for is a long acorn. You'll need to skew the acorn at least 4 times. I recommend doing it more than that just for consistency. Making the acorn bigger will help the clip work easier, just slightly slower to do so. The acorn tends to roll a bit while you're skewing it, and this ends up changing how long the acorn might get. Finding a spot to keep the acorn as still as possible could help. You'll know the acorn is long enough when it's very clearly sticking through Smushy's mushroom cap. Now it's time to explain how we can use this to clip out of bounds. When you have an acorn of this size, dropping it sends you shooting back a little bit, and after wedging yourself between a wall and then dropping the acorn, it'll push you through the wall behind you. So what we're going to do is stand around this corner here and face the can. This is the part of the game where controller is slightly better than keyboard. Both options are totally viable, but controller can turn and face a different direction without moving, but keyboard can't. It's still fully doable on keyboard, but just a little more annoying. Once you've turned and faced the can, drop the acorn and immediately jump. You'll be clipped out of bounds and you'll want to glide around the left side of the wheel. Land into the water behind the gate and go into the load zone from the back. If the acorn isn't clipping you, it's most likely because it isn't long enough. It could be your angle while facing the can. You want to be as perpendicular as possible. If everything is done right, you will be entering Lake of Bloom. This is our final area, Lake of Bloom. This is one of the few places in the game where frame rate matters. The lower your frame rate, the faster the capybara will accelerate. This is why we have the 60 FPS and above limit. Ride over to the middle island and dismount right next to the guy on the rock. This is the one and only purchase that's required of us in the game, the water essence. With this, we can swim underwater. After making the purchase, hop back on the capybara and make a 180 turn to the next island. Here, there's going to be a small division between the beginner and the advanced route. Don't worry, they'll both converge at the same place soon. But first, let's do the beginner route. By placing the water essence in the pedestal, you still get a little bit of free movement afterwards. So you can jump into the water before the cutscene starts playing. These rings give you a nice boost, so hit as many as you can. We'll be grabbing these pink orbs to place into the pedestals. Once placing the last orb, a cutscene will play. Save and quit as soon as you place the orb, and you can save in-game time by not needing to watch the cutscene. Once in the cave, get to this spot here. In a normal playthrough, you would have 2 hooks to utilize to get up here, but since we only have 1, we have to get a little fancy. We can use this slight sloping to get just the little extra height we need to get up. Get on top of this root and enter the pipe. We'll want to get on top of this rock that's attached to the wall. Then get on the cans and glide over to this loading zone. Now we'll talk about the advanced route. This route utilizes a trick found by Juanchop that lets us fly very high. This skips the entire underwater section and the beginning of the cave, saving over 1.5 minutes. When we enter the cutscene, save and quit. Saving and quitting too early tends to mess this up, so delay it just a little bit. Once you load back in, hold down and mash jump. Loading back in allows you to have a bit of free movement before the cutscene makes Smushi walk to his destination. If you've done it correctly, you should hear the sounds of the hooks latching onto something. There's a rock off screen, that's what you're grabbing. Now immediately jump off the rock and start leaf pumping towards this area. Once you see Smushi back on the screen, hold glide. If done correctly, Smushi will launch into the air. As far as why this happens, we don't exactly know, but it's pretty cool. Right when you launch, start holding right. The cutscene will end and you should be super high in the air, right around where the exit of the cave is. Just land down and then enter the cave. We're now going to do another save and quit out of bounds trick. This one is a bit easier than the garden one. All you have to do is jump towards the load zone, and then once you see Smushi disappear, you can save and quit. Upon reloading, hold up left and glide, and land in the water around here. Curve around the area, making sure you don't go back in bounds. There's also a slightly faster route through this little tunnel. Once you're around here, jump up left and start gliding. Make your way over to the next pocket of water out of bounds. Now we just jump back in bounds and go through the load. Talk to the blue guy and then pick up the bucket. Place the water essence and use the limited free movement to dive into the water early. In this game you'll have to pick up 600 pieces of seasoning. Maximizing the time you're boosting will help, but feel free to take it slower and just secure all 600. After collecting all 600, talk to the guy and get the old string. Now you can leave back where you came from. After loading in, do the same jump into the load as we did before, and save and quit. This time when loading back in, hold left and glide. Reach the water out of bounds and come to about here. Jump out of the water and use this incline to get out of this pit. And then use the rope on the rock and you can save and quit for this cutscene as well. The next thing we're going to do is a trick called Chungy Jump. This trick changes a little bit depending on if you decided to grab the first wind essence or not. I'll show examples of both. Normally you'd have 2 hooks to make it out here, but since we only have 1, we'll have to use the terrain to our advantage. Using the slope here gives us just enough height. You're going to want to jump, glide, and hook right around here, and then do 2 leaf pumps towards this direction. With no wind essence, you'll jump and hook around here, and then jump and do 2 leaf pumps using the stamina running out leaf pump we talked about earlier. Once up here, leave the cave and talk to Chungy and the capybaras, and now we'll head to the last section of the game. Ride over to this island, and then break all of the purple rocks. On the last rock, you can save and quit right as you hit it. Once loaded in, glide over to the blue rock. Bring this rock over to the pedestal, and save and quit right as you place it. We've arrived to our last out of bounds trick. Walk through the loading zone, and save and quit just after the fade to black. Once loaded back in, hold back and start gliding. You're going to want to turn around and grab this rock right around here. You don't want to be too high or you'll clip back in, but you also don't want to be too low so then you can't hit the load. Once hooked in the right spot, simply jump and you'll bump to the bottom of the load. This will put you in a strange state where you can still jump and sprint, but you can't really move much. This is also another trick that's faster on lower FPS. Hold sprint and jump over to this spot, and if you double jump, you'll hook onto the wall and pass through. Once through, save and quit, And then once loaded back in, head over here, get on this rock, and jump here to enter this load. Now just go ahead and grab the sacred orb and head on down, talk to the capybaras, and boom, you've completed Smushi Any %. Alright, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, the Smushi Discord will be linked in the description, or if you just want to hang out, everyone's super chill and helpful. You can also leave comments down below and I'll answer them as well. Alright, take care.